Hello Internet, and welcome to the Collective Arcana. We're a channel all about tabletop gaming, and today we're going to be continuing our series on the Pathfinder 2nd Edition classes with the Witch. Hey, before we get going and diving in, please, down there, hit the like, subscribe button. Those really help us out. We really appreciate it. So, the Witch is a prepared caster in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and they actually are one of a small number of classes that actually get to pick their entire spell list, their tradition. The Witch gets 6 hit points plus Constitution modifier per level, and their key ability score is Intelligence. They begin trained in Perception, and that goes up to Expert at level 11. For saving throws, they are trained in Fortitude, and that goes up to Expert at level 5. They are trained in Reflex, which goes up to Expert at level 9. And they are Expert with Will saves, that goes up to Master at level 17. And that's it for the saving throws for the Witch. Probably one of the least impressive saving throw progressions that we've covered so far, at least. But don't worry, the Witch has plenty of cool stuff. For attacks, they are trained in unarmed and simple weapons, and that goes up to Expert at level 11, and they will get Expertise at level 13, but it's unlikely you're going to be doing a whole lot of melee with your Witch. There are some options that we'll talk about, so don't be too put off by that. For defense, you're going to be trained in unarmored defense. That will go up to Expert at level 13. And all this is pretty well fitting with spellcasters that we've seen so far. For skills, you'll begin trained with 3 plus your Intelligence modifier, which, as your key ability is probably pretty high, as well as 1 that is based on the Patron that you choose. Now, it's the first time we've talked about Patron. It's not going to be the last, but we're not there yet. For spellcasting, you begin trained. That will progress to Expert at level 7, Master at 15, and Legendary at 19, and that applies to both your spell attacks and your spell DCs, so as always, it's across the board. And you are trained and etc. in a tradition based on your patron. There's that word again. I guess let's hop on in. So a patron for a witch is the source of your power. If you've played if you've played D&D 5e, you're familiar with the Warlock's patron. Very similar thing, with a little bit of difference. So, for the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Witch, as well as the 1st Edition, but so for the Witch, your patron is a mysterious entity, or potentially combination of entities. It could be a deity or demigod, a powerful archfiend, or a fairy lord or fey lord. It could be a coven of hags. Could be any combination of those sort of creatures. Could be, Cthulhu. Any weirdness, right? Whatever you can imagine, or more likely whatever your GM can imagine. Because part of the fun with a patron, and it's a wonderful thing about tabletop games. If it doesn't interest you, you can always come up with something else. But the fun thing is that by default, you may not know much at all about your patron. You know that they give you power, and they are associated with certain concepts or themes, but you don't know their intention, their identity, or even, again, the type of creature they may be. In fact, for a lot of witches, especially at lower levels, your only contact or concept of your patron will be through your familiar. Now, your familiar, a lot of classes get a familiar. It's something that, like the animal companions, we should probably do a video on. Maybe we will. We had intended to do Witch, alphabetically, so it was going to be the last class that we covered, and I'd hoped to have already done familiars by then. But a lot of people really requested the Witch early, which makes sense. It's one of the newer classes, and it's certainly one of the more complex-looking classes. I don't know that it's necessarily one of the most complex in play, but we'll talk about that. But a lot of classes will get a familiar. Now, what's interesting about the Witch's familiar is just that it is better. Flat out, every conceivable way. Now, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, if you're coming from another game or edition, they can work differently. But for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, Your familiar is just typically a mundane but strange little animal that is superficially not different from others, but it is bonded to you, and it both enhances your spellcasting in different ways, or gives you other boons, or is in some way magically enhanced itself. And you determine those enhancements either for yourself or your familiar each day as part of your preparations. You can generally change those each day, although some familiars that by default have some abilities, like one of the abilities is a fly speed, for example. If your familiar is a bird, you have to pick that fly speed every day. You can't be like, nah, bird, you can't fly today. Sorry, you're penguin now. Unless it was a penguin to begin with. So that's cool because for creatures that can't fly, now they can. It's not some big crazy thing that you have to do. It's just something that you can decide. And so today my toad can talk. Whatever you're into. And there's a whole big list of them. We're not going to go into them. That would be a whole video, like I said, even beyond just the video on how familiars work. But your familiar is a little buddy that grants you access, and itself access, to some magical abilities. Just to touch on some of them to give you an idea, it can include helping you refresh your focus points, even giving you additional spell slots, being able to cast spells itself, deliver spells for you, being able to share senses, all sorts of things like that. So it's a nice wide range of abilities, and most familiars get two. As a witch, your familiar will default to 3. So that's 50% better right there. But it gets even better because at level 6, 12, and 18, I believe that's right, yes. At level 6, 12, and 18, you will gain an additional master and familiar point. There's no rules on how you can divide those. If you just want to have just a squirrel for a companion that can't really do anything and take all those abilities for yourself, you can. If you really like the idea of having a powerful and potent extra member of the party who can get up to mischief and do cool things, then you can absolutely put all those points into your familiar, and again, you can decide on any given day how you want to switch that around. So that's really cool, it's really fun, and those extra points are huge. You can kind of think of them as a fraction of a feat each in terms of their overall power, but depending on how you combine them with some of your other abilities and how much you can squeeze a lot out of them is the point, those master and familiar abilities. So being able to have 3 times as many as the default is huge. And it really adds a lot to the playstyle and mechanics, and also that flavor of, this creature, this little familiar, rather than most spellcasters recruiting a familiar as just an assistant, this one came to you. It brought power to you at the bidding of some unknown strange entity. So it makes sense that that bond that you would have and the power that it brings is going to be that much more obvious from low levels and on up. In addition to providing that familiar, your patron will also teach you lessons. And it will also determine what your spellcasting tradition is, what that bonus skill that you're proficient in is. Again, if you're coming from outside of Pathfinder 2e, or if you're just new to the system, your tradition is, there are 4. There's arcane, divine, occult, and primal. Arcane is typically associated with wizards, traditionally in other systems. Divine is your clerics, your holy magic, or unholy, as it may be. And then occult is sort of secrets and illusion and obfuscation and just occultism, secret knowledge, and especially things that affect mind or control or things like that, other people. Bards are the default occult spellcasters in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, so if that helps you get an idea of the flavor. And then primal is druids. That's very natural, whether it's cataclysmic natural disasters or harmony with the nature that you're in, whatever your flavor is, but it's natural magic that comes from the earth. or, well, not necessarily Earth, but from your surroundings, whatever planet you happen to be playing on. So as a witch, depending on which patron you pick, and again, you're not technically picking your patron, that's something that your GM will decide, maybe with input from you, maybe completely on their own. It depends on what you guys, what you go into thinking about it. But but you do choose the theme, and there are a number of themes. Each one brings with it a determined arcane or spellcasting tradition, and then a hex, which is your focus spells, and then also an additional spell known, a bonus spell known. Most of the patrons for the witch are occult, which is pretty fitting, just given the flavor of the class, and those are curse, fate, night, and then the Lost Omens Legends added Baba Yaga, which is the only one that we have that is a specific entity called out, whereas the others are all just these ideas, but the Baba Yaga is a specific lore-focused one in Pathfinder. But the fun thing about Baba Yaga is it's a real-world mythological figure in our world, and as such it has been adapted to many, many fictional worlds and could potentially fit into any game that you're playing. So don't shy away from it just because it's a Galarian Pathfinder specific setting focused type of patron, because Baba Yaga or some similar winter fae type old lady in the woods with the chicken house is definitely a thing that's in a whole lot of fantasy and settings, so should be okay. Always consult your GM though. Divine only has a single patron right now, or patron theme, and that is Fervor. And then Arcane has Rune, which is its only, which would be very fitting for, sort of Nordic type. But then you also have Primal tradition, and those are the Wild theme and the Winter theme. So again, each one will give you a specific spellcasting tradition, a specific hex, and a specific extra spell known. I'm not going to go into all of them here. You should definitely check them out. The hexes are, what's unique about these, your starting hexes, or focus spells, it's just what they're called for which, is they are cantrips, which means that they can be used an unlimited number of times. Except they can't, because they typically will have a cooldown where the same creature cannot be affected by them for at least another minute. So yeah, in terms of a long-term adventuring day, unlimited use, but you can't just spam them the way that you sort of could well, no, I guess there were some controls on it in Pathfinder 1, but it's not something that you can just every round toss it out necessarily, unless you've got a lot of different targets on the board. They are typically not terribly powerful compared to, say, Inspire Courage that a bard has, or something like that, in terms of other focus cantrips, but it is the only other class, bard being the other, that has focus cantrips right now. So just that alone is pretty good. Additionally, the majority of the witch's hexes, even the ones that we'll talk about as we get into your builds and the others that you can pick up, are single actions. So it really solves one of the biggest problems that you may have as a spellcaster in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, or any character really, is making sure you've got a good third action to use, because sometimes you may not need to move, or you may not want to take an additional attack, and that third action is really the key to having an effective character, is having something you can reliably fall back on when you don't need to tactically retreat, or swing for the fences, or you cast a spell with only 2 actions, whatever. Having a good use of that third action is very important to having a strong, versatile character. So that alone makes them pretty good, even though they're not as strong as maybe some of the other things that you could do with your round. The fact that it's a thing that you can just pop off in addition to whatever else you did on your round. So you can cast a full spell and then get a hex off. Very good. Now, of course, you can pick up other hexes, but the other ones that you can pick up through feats are not cantrips. Got to stress that. They are not cantrips. As such, they do scale a lot better. Most of the hex cantrips are about as good as they're ever going to be at level 1. Now, the way that scaling works in Pathfinder, that's not necessarily the worst thing. But you know, when you see a +1, that's always going to be a +1. The math's tight. That's okay. It's just not spectacular. So one of the other cool things about this witch patron dynamic is, okay, so you're a prepared spellcaster. And you've got this, so you get 10 cantrips known, and I think 5 first level spells. I didn't really look at it, but don't quote me. But anyway, you get 2 additional spells every time you level up that you know. You can also, because you're a prepared spellcaster, you can learn additional spells. Now, a wizard has to, have the thing, study the scroll, whatever. As a witch, if you have a scroll, your familiar can just eat it and learn the spell and add it to your spell list. As usual, it's got to be on your spell list, but in terms of your spell known, your familiar is your spell book. So you can just feed it a scroll and it knows that spell. You can also learn spells directly from another witch's familiar. When you do this, you have to pay the traditional cost to learn a spell. But it's not as simple as just eating it. You got to take the time, and you typically have to pay the cost. And you may think, well, what am I paying for? I don't need to buy, magical paper and ink to write my spellbook. Well, you've got to make an offering equal to the right amount of gold to the other witch's familiar. And like I said, that's just super fun. These weird little super familiars that have their own whole lives besides the spellcaster who is not quite just their master like in other spellcasters. But so that's super duper fun, and it's a really interesting thing about the witch that sets it apart from just an arcane wizard. To remove the misfortune hex from your dice, click subscribe. A witch is no match for the collective. So that's the basics of what a witch is and what it can do. Now let's talk about what your witch could do. Let's get into feats and builds. So full disclosure, the witch, as one of the newer classes, just came out in the APG just a couple months ago. It's not got as many feats as the 12 core classes, or 12 classes that came out in the core rulebook. But it does still have a lot of really cool options. So first and foremost, it's got all the standard stuff you expect from a Pathfinder 2nd Edition spellcaster. It's going to get access to Counterspell. It's going to get access to some of the more common meta magics like Widen, Reach, and Conceal, and Quicken Spell at 10th level. So those are classic options. More thematic, you're going to get an ability to turn your familiar into a Leshy familiar, which is interesting. It's not something that a lot of classes can do. I think only the Druid by default can do that as well. So it's nice to have that feat option. But you can also take the improved familiar feats to get even more familiar and master feats. So the first one is enhanced familiar at level 2, and that will give you 2 additional master and familiar points, bringing your total to 5, compared to if a wizard had a familiar and then took that feat, getting 4. But you'll also get access to an even higher level version to get 2 more, which means that at 20th level, your witch could have, or your witch and familiar could have 10 master and familiar abilities to split between them, or pile onto 1, as we said. While not all of those master and familiar abilities are going to be as impressive as others, that's still a huge amount of variety and cool options. There's also additional lessons you can learn from your patron. Roleplay wise, this also might come with more information and insight into who your patron is, but if nothing else, they will always give you an additional hex, which is your focus spells, as well as an additional spell known added to your list. Now, what's really fun about these lessons is that it's entirely possible to get spells that would not normally be on your spell list. There are no prerequisites that say, the ones that give you a primal spell, for example. that you can't take those as a divine witch. So that means that you can really organically and without having to go through multi-class hoops or anything else like that, you can get access to some really different spells than someone else in your spellcasting tradition can. Much the same way that a cleric with certain domains will get access to some off-list spells. But you can really get access to more because you can take a lesser, a greater, and then a major lesson. And then the major lesson is repeatable, so you can either pick up, an earlier one, or, well, really they all can be used to pick up, so you could take a greater and just learn another lesser if you wanted. Not necessarily the most recommendable thing, but, it's an option, because those more powerful hexes can get pretty fun. But because the last one is repeatable, you could end up with several spells from not your spell list, which just in terms of versatility is great, and can be a huge boon to the party if you're lacking a certain type of tradition or something like that. Just you don't get to pick exactly which spell, they are set, but just having access to a spell that if someone else may not be able to get access to easily is big on its own. So that's a lot of fun, and in terms of most classes and the feats that they get, which just add a focus spell, getting an additional potentially off-book spell known is really, really huge. One of the other low-level, and cannot recommend it enough, feats that you can get as a witch is the Cackle, and that will give you a new focus spell, Cackle, which is a free action that will allow you to sustain a spell that's already in effect. So you pay a focus point and you get to use the sustain action, which is normally one of your 3 actions for the round, for free. It also gives you an additional focus point, so just a lot of value there with that feat, and it's something that I don't want to say is mandatory or required, but it's really hard to pass up, certainly. In addition to focus spells and your familiar, you can also get some limited alchemical access. The Witch's Cauldron especially is unique because while it's a smaller number of options in that it's only potions and oils, which are things that you apply to your weapon, they can, or armor I suppose, but they are, so it's a limited list. You don't get the poisons and the bombs and even the elixirs and things. You just get potions and oils. But what you can do with that cauldron is you can make larger batches than others can. You can also pick up the ability to just, for free as part of your preparations for the day, just make 2 of the things you can make with your cauldron without having to pay the normal time, gold, and just time and gold, without having to pay the normal time and gold costs. So that's fun, and it can really help keep the party going. You're also going to be able to get access to put your hexes into a bottle, so that you can, including a cackle to extend the duration, into just a bottle so your ally can take them with you. Speaking of an ally, or take them with them, but speaking of an ally taking something with them, you can get a feat where you can designate a witch's charge, which is someone that you say, okay, I want to know all day what's going on with the rogue. I want to make sure the rogue is healthy, if there's any conditions on them, how far away, and in what direction they are from me at any given time. In addition to that, you can cast any spell that you would normally have to touch up to 30 feet away on them. So, if you have access to healing magic and you know that you've got a frontliner and you know that you're about to go into a fight where you're expecting them to be soaking up a lot of damage, just being able to burn low-level heals with one of your 3 actions, still having 2 actions to cast spells, while healing that fighter without having to be right up next to them and in the danger zone yourself, still being 30 feet away. Being able to do that and get access to those single action heal spells, burning up lower level slots, however you're prepared, that's huge. That's a lot of survivability that you can passively throw off, in addition to still being able to use your 2 action for an additional heal. So that's very fun. Not very cost effective for your spells per day, but really, really potent way to keep somebody alive. And then, you know, that's not including other buffs and various things that just being able to do them without having to spend the extra action or a meta magic feat to be able to do them at further with like reach spell. That's huge in terms of your ability to support the party. At higher levels, you'll be able to cast one of the spells you learned with one of your lessons without expending a spell slot or even having it prepared. That is an amount of versatility that every prepared caster would love to have. That is massive. Just to show you the weird upper end, at level 20, you can also designate a structure, such as a home, a wagon, a hut, anything that would take up less than a huge amount of space, so 15 by 15. And you can make it an animated creature. So anyone who's familiar with Baba Yaga, to go back to her, the Russian and Eastern European folklore figure, she is known to have a hut with chicken legs that walks around the forest. You can do that at level 20. It can take, you know, specific actions. It can't be used to combat, but it can, you know, defend or, you know, let you know if people are approaching. It can move, be a mobile home. Like, that's pretty cool in D&D. It's something that at level 20, I feel like maybe it's not as exciting as it could have been for level 20. But it's absolutely as weird as it could be, and that's, in a lot of places, the Witch's goal. So what do we think? The Witch is a support-focused caster, not unlike a Bard, which, you know, considering most of its patrons or themes make it an occult caster, and considering that Bard and Witch are the only classes that get focused cantrips, it's a good comparison to make. The Bard, of course, has muses, which are not terribly unlike patrons even, but they do have a spontaneous spell. They are spontaneous spellcasters versus the Witch is prepared, which is a whole separate thing. You can watch our video. It'll be linked around here somewhere where we talk about spellcasting in 2e, just sort of a crash course, so you can get some ideas of what those differences are and the pros and cons there. But overall, they are relatively similar, and they fill similar roles, buffing and debuffing, making good use of cantrips and focus spells in general to keep a lot of action economy up, to still be able to cast and also send some sort of buff or debuff out all in the same turn. The Bard is strictly going to sort of be better at that focus cantrip game and the focus spells in general. If you look at something like Nudge Fate for the Witch versus something like Inspire Courage for the Bard, not really a comparison there. One of them is absolutely better, but that's okay because the Witch is gaining a lot elsewhere. That familiar should not be overlooked, especially going into the new year. We're going to get Secrets of Magic. If you don't think there's going to be a lot of fun and weird, either new familiars that you can take over, specific familiars that you can swap in for your default familiar, or just more master and familiar abilities, I promise you there will be. You're getting that. You're also getting the overall build versatility in that you can choose your spell list. Now that's controversial how much of a benefit that is, because theoretically that's something that after level 1 you're no longer feeling that benefit. You know, your tradition is set, that's what you have, but you do have that really easy access through those different lessons to a few spells, cherry-picked, not ones you may specifically want, but a little bit of exposure to some other spell lists, which can, you know, definitely give you an edge there. There's also a lot to be said for just having that familiar at all, and those few extra abilities that it gets you. And then that's not even mentioning your ability to brew up some helpful concoctions that you can distribute, you know, before combat, or just, you know, stockpile whatever it is, and that you can create them in mass, 6 at a time in a batch instead of 4 at a time in a batch for other people making alchemy. So your focus spells, your focus cantrips, your familiar and its tricks and abilities that it can grant itself or you, and then the fact that you can you know, get a few options from outside of your default spell class. It really pumps the witch up in terms of versatility. And that's really what makes both a good support class and sets it apart from other classes and general other spellcasters. I will say that overall I think the witch is maybe not as flashy and obviously powerful as something like a druid, you know, calling down huge storms, turning into, you know, great beasts and things, which are not things that a witch can't do. It's just that it's things that the witch doesn't get a lot of feat support for. What it does get feat support for is supporting the party and weird stuff. So it's high flavor. It's definitely, while not flashy, it is definitely effective. And having, you know, as I said, all those different things, from the alchemy to the focus cantrips to the weird spells, it can really expand and lengthen a gaming day for a party because you've got extra resources that other people might not have. You are more economic with those resources than other characters, other classes might be, and it can allow you to spread the more limited resources in the party around. So that can be really helpful to the party, and you're definitely going to be very valued, if not as dramatic as a barbarian turning into a dragon and charging into the middle of a fight. With that said, in addition to being effective, if not always flashy, the witch is also bringing in huge, delicious plot hooks. That the fact that the familiar, unlike other familiars, is not beholden to act at your command. It is more beholden to your patron. In practice, in play, you know, your GM will probably not be having it tell you no, but it may be trying to influence your decisions and, you know, hint or push you in certain directions, if not actually, you know, combating you and disagreeing and butting heads like that. But it may be influencing you and therefore the party in certain ways to appease the will and the whims of your patron. The patron itself also might have to make itself known, either in big, huge, grandiose ways, showing up, you know, full manifestation of a deity or demigod right in the middle of the tavern. But it could just leave hints for you out in the world, signs that only you recognize. It's a lot of ways for a GM to drive a story based on that character choice that you've made. And it gives you a lot as a player to play off of. And if that seems intimidating to you, if you're a newer player, I want to stress that having those big plot hook type things, especially for new players, can be really good because it gives you something tangible to grasp onto. It's why a lot of people will recommend you know, a cleric to a newer player, even though a cleric has big, scary responsibilities and jobs. Having that, like, religion as a foundation to roleplay from as a new player who may not have any clue how to begin role-playing is really good. And so having this familiar and this sort of little talking head, you know, familiar, and this overarching patron are two really good hooks and ways that the GM can both, you know, push you and help you, you know, spur you to do RP, and also be a place for you to start from in terms of designing a character and role-playing out that character. So for all those reasons, I think the Witch is great. I think it is super interesting, and one of the most interesting, I think, classes in the game, just in terms of the flavor of it. Oracle is also up there, but it's just a really unique class, even compared to the obvious comparison in 5e, the Warlock, which works very differently and is much more a combat or a much more direct type of character, whereas the Witch is very supporty. But they do both bring in that RP element, those hooks, and those pushes to roleplay. So I think it's a great class. I think it's super fun. I think you should definitely check it out. Don't be intimidated by how different it is from other classes, those focus cantrips and the focus on the familiar and things like that. Dive in, check it out. It's a lot of fun. I hope you like it. Down in the comments, definitely let us know. Don't forget to like and subscribe, but don't forget to go ahead and let us know down in the comments what you think of the Witch, what your experiences are. If you have any advice for people, of course, you know, let people know. Thanks so much for hanging out. We'll see you next time. Welcome to the Collective.